Welcome back. You're watching the Jacksonville History Show. I'm Harry Reagan. Our guest now is Megan Powell, Administrative Assistant and Event Coordinator at the Historical Society. Megan, welcome.
Hi, Harry. Thanks for having me.
We want to talk about a program coming up next month, celebrating or commemorating, maybe, Hurricane Dora. Hurricanes are not as newsworthy in Jacksonville because we don't have as many of them as some parts of the state, but this was a doozy.
Right, yeah. I think people who don't live in Florida maybe assume that we just constantly have hurricanes all the time, but
not
Jacksonville, no, not so much. We might have some hurricane parties maybe and celebrate with the rest of the state or commemorate maybe. But yeah, very, very true.
And so it was a very bad hurricane, a lot of damage and so forth.
Dora ended up doing about $200 million worth of damage in Jacksonville alone, or in Duval County alone, the first coast, and ended up doing about $300 million in damage by the time it was back in the Atlantic. So yeah, very, very dangerous.
Well, let's take a look at some of the photos which will tell the story.
So this first photo here is from the Times-Union, and it shows the path of Dora. And I think besides, Dora being the first strike to the first coast in about a decade, Dora is also famous for making this famous U-turn. And so September 6th, it's sitting outside of the coast and just kind of spinning and idling, and they think maybe it's going to go back into the Atlantic and just kind of go away. And it doesn't, and it starts heading for St. Augustine. Makes landfall in St. Augustine the 9th and the 10th. Gets to Jacksonville, and as the papers love to say, turns on its heel towards the west, towards the Panhandle. Gets to Apalachicola, and Alabama has a cold front, and sends the hurricane back towards Jacksonville. So yeah, Jacksonville gets about 6 1/4 inches of rain on the first time through, and then it gets about another 2 inches when it's pushed back. So yeah, lots of flooding, lots of damage.
So 50 years later, we're commemorating this event, and we have not had that many hurricanes since Dora.
No.
Really?
No, not really. We have Andrew come in in '92, but nothing really in Jacksonville's area, that does a lot of damage. So.
So what the Historical Society is having a program.
Yes.
And we're going to show a special produced by WJXT TV4. And we get to preview it.
Yeah, we're special.
Before it actually airs on Channel 4.
I think almost a week or a couple days at least before it airs. The documentary will be on the destruction of Dora, everybody getting prepared for it, the Red Cross, and it will also be talking about George Winterling and how he was the
legendary
George Winterling,
yes,
and how he was the only meteorologist to accurately portray the path that it would take. They'll talk about the famous U-turn, and then of course they will talk about President Johnson coming into town, followed by the Beatles, and so talk about some destruction, but some things that came out of it that are very memorable to, I think, a lot of people. A lot of our members, hopefully.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and see some more photos here.
So the next photo we have here is in Avondale, and this is just showing the flooding that's going on. Our next one is Memorial Park in the St. John's, and how it's just, not only is it flooding the area, but it is taking down the pedestals there on the park. So this one, a little bit smaller, but in the upper left-hand side, you've got a parking lot that's overlooking, or that you can see the Main Street Bridge from. And in the larger photo, that's the flooding, this very same parking lot. So I think that's very telling. It's also telling most of these photos are going to be from the Times-Union or the Journal. This is where we got these. The next one is Yacht Club Road, I believe, in Ortega. And then this, I believe it's a kid maybe, or a gentleman standing there. The water is very high. And so this is just showing the flooding. You do have a lot of damage. You've got about 42 homes, oceanfront homes. They're going to be swept into the ocean. and you're going to have 3,950 homes that are damaged just solely on the First Coast. About 300 of those are going to be damaged severely. But so this is, and this is the reason, right? We have a lot of flooding going on. This photo is interesting. Obviously, this is in it's a house, completely destroyed. This is in Ponte Vedra Beach. But this one is interesting also because this is the only photo that the archives, the Historical Society archives, actually has the right to. The other ones, like I said, are Times Union or Journal photos. So it's just an interesting point that we don't have very many photos, that are our own. So, and then next, obviously, you have President Johnson. LBJ arrived on the 11th. Kind of a surprise visit to survey the damage. He does a short press conference at NAS JAX, basically declaring this a federal disaster area, and that they would allocate enough funds to help restore and rebuild. But I think in this photo, you've got the governor and the mayor, and Johnson.
And an even maybe bigger arrival. Let's take a look at the Beatles.
And so the Beatles were scheduled to perform at the Gator Bowl, and they are flying to Jacksonville on the 10th, and obviously they cannot get here, so they have to be redirected, and they land in sunny Key West and spend the day there. And the same day that LBJ gets to Jacksonville on the 11th, the Beatles arrive. They held a press conference, saying that they're not going to perform to a segregated crowd at the Gator Bowl, and luckily enough, Jacksonville did the right thing.
We have to come back and revisit the Beatles.
Right.
Visit.
Yes, the Beatles.
And one Beatle, Paul, came back for a Super Bowl.
Yes.
And then and soon to come back yet again.
Yeah. So they had a good time.
Let's just briefly mention, and we'll talk about them in future shows. Two big events coming up that are traditions for the Historical Society. Halloween event and gingerbread extravaganza.
Yes, so our Halloween at the Casket Party, our Casket Factory, party, it will be a little bit earlier this year. It'll be October 18th, 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. They'll have food, drinks, beverages. It's an adult party, of course, and our 5,000 square foot casket building.
Thank you, Megan Powell, for being our guest on the Jacksonville History Show. And for more information, visit our website, jackshistory.com, or call 665-0064. Until next time, we're history.
I think that one thing that these two hurricanes teaches us is that we have made tremendous strides. I was impressed and told the president as we were riding along with the apparent integrity of the builders and the engineers in the Florida structure, because most of the buildings did survive all except the worst kind of force. And the fact that there was no loss of life is an evidence of this. That's true in both Clio and Dora. And generally, while of course we can improve our building codes in all areas, I don't know that uniformity necessarily is the answer.
For 6 years, Dade County has had the most rigid, most hurricane-conscious building code in the state. Christopher C. Tyson, Construction Control Supervisor for the Metro Building and Zoning Department, explains the major features of that code.
The most unusual thing is that we require roofs to be tied down. This you don't find in most other codes, and certainly never do you find it defined so specifically. Normally, we have wood truss roofs or wood rafter roofs in this area, and we require that a 1/8 inch by 1 inch strap with 3 16-penny nails tie down each rafter or each truss. And this goes very far in protecting the individual homeowner during time of hurricane. And most people in this area can stay in their own homes with good confidence that they will survive the storm. Now, Chapter 23 of the South Florida Building Code describes very specifically the loads in pounds per square foot that buildings must resist, both roofs and side walls. Over $250,000 has been spent in testing doors, windows, louvered windows, jalousie windows, etc. in this area to see that they will stand up to the 40-pound load that we require on first and second story installations. In higher installations, we require higher loads. These same requirements in the South Florida Building Code, if enforced in the northern portion of the state, could have considerably lessened the damage that was suffered there, but would not have helped in those particular locations where there were high tides or flood damage.
During the night of September 10th, the prevailing easterlies that drove Dora to Florida gave way to strong westerlies. No longer a hurricane, Tropical Storm Dora took a sharp backward turn at the elbow of the Florida Panhandle and sloshed through Georgia and the Carolinas to her grave in the North Atlantic. Before she made her exit, however, Dora left North Florida saturated with over 15 inches of rain. Georgia rivers, swollen from that state's own encounter with Dora, dumped more water into this state. On hand were WTT North Florida.
Insurance against damage to property by floods, including wave wash and high tides, cannot economically be provided by insurance companies because of the selection that would exist against the companies. In other words, the man with property in the river valley or on the ocean front would want to buy it, but the man on the hill would not. This is an age-old problem which has been considered for many years. The Federal Flood Insurance Act of 1956 authorized the establishment of federal insurance and reinsurance against the risk of flood. So far, this program has not been implemented. However, the insurance industry is trying to establish a pool which will probably involve every segment of the insurance industry in America and possibly reinsurance by the federal government so that some sort of flood protection can be made available. We sincerely hope that something can be worked out soon to make this needed protection available.
Governor Bryant is an apostle of states' rights. Generally, he opposes federal aid programs. But the governor bent with the wind, so to speak, to offer a solution to the flood insurance problem.
Points that came home to me the most was that here is a type of damage, that is from floods, from high tides, from water generally, against which we do not have adequate insurance coverage. At the present time, insurance companies do not insure against this phase of a natural disaster any more than they will insure against the kind of earthquake that they had in Alaska. And I think that if private companies cannot, and I understand that they cannot, issue this kind of insurance on a sound basis, the federal government ought to underwrite or back in some way operations by private companies in enabling an individual to insure his own property against every kind of hazard, including flood and tide damage.
We'll return with the conclusion to September Storm in a moment. Those who argue against a statewide hurricane building code say it's unwarranted because South Florida gets hit more frequently than does North Florida. Statistically, this is true, but the fact that storms like Dora only happen every 60 or 75 years does not reduce the need for stronger walls and tighter roofs when they do come. Ed Larson, State Insurance Commissioner, says building standards should be left to the separate communities. But the average citizen is not an engineer. He has no way of judging whether his new home will withstand a hurricane. A building code is supposed to protect the public. There have been charges that small-town lawmakers are frequently too willing to be influenced by large builders interested in cutting costs. It's difficult to see why the state cannot act to establish minimum standards to protect the people of Florida wherever they live. Flood insurance is a somewhat different matter. Insurance Commissioner Larson heads a national committee studying the problem, which is acute in Florida. But so far, there doesn't appear to be any coordinated effort on state and local levels to put Florida on the road to a much-desired underground power system, one that will not fall victim to every September storm that comes our way. It'll be interesting to see what public program, if any, emerges from the lessons these hurricanes try to teach us. This is Wayne Farris for Outlook. Good night.
You have been watching September Storm on Outlook, a weekly presentation of WCKT News. Next Sunday at 6:30, Outlook will present another report of interest to the South Florida community. This program was pre-recorded. WCKT invites your comments.
Of the many hurricanes that have plagued the Atlantic coast in the last few decades, Dora has proved to be one of the most devastating. As she blew herself out with the last flounce, the people of Florida and Georgia were opening the door on more than $200 million in damage. Most of the devastation was across the northern neck of Florida and the Georgia border. Beach areas suffered from erosion, and this is the scene that confronted the presidential jet as Mr. Johnson flew south to make a personal survey. His plane skims the scudding ocean at 500 feet, and from the starboard side he sees shorefront homes battered by wind, undermined by sea, and tumbled into heaps of debris. The presidential plane landed for a first-hand inspection at Jacksonville Beach, one of Florida's hardest hit areas. The president said that the damage was much worse than he expected and promised that all of the facilities of government would be at the disposal of the distressed people. The president concludes his tour at San Simon Island in Georgia. Mr. Johnson has declared the devastated sections of both states disaster areas. This will enable homeowners and businessmen to obtain federal loans for rebuilding. Such aid will help heal the horrible scars left by Hurricane Dora. They call her Dora, but she's no lady. The fourth major hurricane of the season, Dora, slams at Jacksonville Beach and points north and south along the Florida-Georgia coastline. Winds of 100 miles an hour and upwards piled mountainous seas across the beaches. At one point, the storm covered an area greater than the New England states. The calm eye of the storm took 2 hours to pass over St. Augustine as more than 30,000 people took refuge in schools and hospitals along the coast. In St. Augustine, much of the beach was lost to erosion. One 60-foot section of the seashore just disappeared. In Savannah Beach, Georgia, the polling lists were moved 15 miles inland so people could ballot. If you had to put it to a vote, Dora was the most unpopular girl in town.